The fine, khaki-colored dust of the Kandahar airfield tasted like contempt. It settled on Captain Eva Rostova's tongue, a gritty reminder of where she stood in the eyes of the men around her. They moved with the easy, predatory grace of apex predators, their gear a second skin, their laughter a low, rumbling frequency that seemed to vibrate just for them. SEAL Team 6, callsign Reaper, didn't just walk onto a base, they owned it. And to them, she was just part of the scenery. Or worse, a liability. You sure that's our air support? The voice, belonging to a mountain of a man named Decker, was deliberately loud. He didn't bother to look at her, instead addressing his team leader, Lieutenant Commander Marcus Thorne. Looks like she might get lost on the way to the cockpit. Eva kept her back to them, her hands methodically checking the ordnance slung under the wings of her A-10 Warthog. Each paveway bomb, each missile, was a familiar friend. The plane itself, ugly and brutally efficient, felt more like home than the small-town Texas house she'd grown up in. Its official designation was the Thunderbolt II, but to pilots and the grunts who loved it, it was the Warthog. To Eva, it was Brunhild, her avenging angel. She ran a gloved hand over its scarred, grey fuselage, the metal cool even under the oppressive Afghan sun. She could feel the low thrum of its latent power, a beast waiting to be unleashed. Thorne, a man whose reputation was carved from rock and shadow, finally glanced away. His eyes, the colour of a winter sky, held no warmth. She's what they gave us, Decker. Just make sure you paint the targets clearly. We don't need any friendly fire incidents from our Valkyrie. He said her callsign with a barely concealed sneer. The name, meant to be a tribute to her fierce flying and training, felt like a joke coming from his lips. The mission was a ghost hunt. A high-value target, a shadowy arms dealer known only as the Broker, was meeting a splinter cell of insurgents in a network of canyons in the Sharikot Valley. It was a place of jagged peaks and deep, winding ravines, a death trap. The SEALs were the scalpel, tasked with surgically removing the Broker. Eva and her Warthog were the hammer, on station to provide close air support if things went sideways. The if was a formality. In this part of the world, things always went sideways. Eva finished her pre-flight check, the familiar ritual a balm to her frayed nerves. She wasn't angry. Anger was a hot, messy emotion that had no place in the cold, calculated world of a pilot. What she felt was a familiar, icy resolve. It had been the same feeling that propelled her through flight school, where instructors had told her she lacked the killer instinct. It was the same feeling that pushed her through SEAL training, where her male counterparts had dismissed her as a diversity quota hire. They saw her 5'6" frame, her quiet professionalism, and mistook it for weakness. They had no idea of the fire banked deep inside her, a furnace forged in the memory of a father who told her she could be anything, and a world that constantly told her she couldn't. She swung herself up into the cockpit, the worn leather of the seat molding to her form. The world outside, with its dismissive smirks and arrogant posturing, fell away. Here, encased in what the grunts affectionately called a titanium bathtub, she was no longer just Eva Rostova. She was Valkyrie. She was the ghost in the machine, the unseen hand that could deliver salvation or damnation from 30,000 feet. The pre-flight litany was a prayer. Avionics, on. Weapons systems, green. Engines, spooling up with a hungry whine that escalated into a deafening roar. She taxied Brunhild onto the runway, the lumbering beast suddenly feeling light, eager. Through the comms, she heard the SEALs transport, a sleek MH-47 Chinook, lift off with a rhythmic whomp-whomp-whomp of its rotor blades. They were on their way. She was their guardian, whether they wanted her or not. Valkyrie, this is Sky. The AWACS controller's voice crackled in her helmet. Reapers are 5 minutes from insertion point. You are cleared for takeoff. Maintain holding pattern over grid Sierra 9. Solid copy, Sky. Eva responded, her voice calm, professional. Valkyrie is wheels up. She pushed the throttles forward, and the A-10 surged down the runway. The power was immense, a physical force that pressed her back into her seat. The ground fell away, and the sprawling, dusty base shrank into a miniature map. Below her, the landscape unfolded, a brutal, beautiful tapestry of brown and ochre, mountains clawing at a sky so blue it hurt to look at. She banked the Warthog, the powerful engines screaming their defiance, and climbed towards her holding pattern. For 40 minutes, she circled, a patient hawk riding the thermals. The sun began its slow descent, painting the mountain peaks in hues of orange and blood red. The radio was silent, save for the occasional burst of static. Down below, in the labyrinth of rock and shadow, Reaper Team was moving. She imagined them, ghosts in the twilight, their movements precise, economical, deadly. They were the best of the best, and they didn't need her. Until they did. The microtension began to build in her gut. It was too quiet. Operations like this were never this quiet. The enemy knew these canyons like the back of their hands. They would have watchers, spotters, tripwires. The SEALs were walking into a prepared kill zone. The broker wasn't just an arms dealer. He was a master strategist. He wouldn't agree to a meeting in a place he couldn't control. Another 10 minutes crawled by. The silence on the radio stretched thin, brittle. Eva's thumb hovered over the transmit button. Protocol dictated she maintain radio silence unless contacted by the ground team. But protocol felt wrong. Her instincts, the ones the instructors claimed she didn't have, were screaming at her. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. She zoomed her targeting pod's camera in on the designated insertion point, scanning the rocky terrain. Nothing. No heat signatures, no movement. It was as if the 6-man SEAL team had simply vanished. She expanded the search. Grid, her eyes tracing the deep shadows that pulled at the base of the cliffs. Still nothing. It was like looking for needles in a haystack made of rock. Then, a flicker. A tiny, almost imperceptible glint of light from a ridge overlooking the canyon where the meeting was supposed to take place. It wasn't a heat signature. It was a reflection. Optics. A sniper scope. She followed the line of sight down into the canyon and her blood ran cold. It wasn't empty. Her thermal imager, now cranked to maximum sensitivity, began to pick them up. Dozens of them. Figures tucked into crevices, behind boulders, in shallow caves carved into the canyon walls. An army, waiting in ambush, sky-eye. This is Valkyrie, she said, her voice tight, breaking protocol. I have eyes on multiple hostiles in the objective area. Looks like a welcoming party. Reaper Team walked into a trap. Before the AWACS controller could respond, the radio exploded. It wasn't a voice, not at first. It was a cacophony of sound, the sharp, tearing rip of heavy machine gun fire, the concussive whump of RPGs, and the unmistakable crackle of AK-47s. Then, Thorne's voice, strained and breathless, cut through the chaos. Valkyrie, this is Reaper 1. We are pinned down. Pinned down in the devil's own shooting gallery. We are taking heavy fire from the cliffs, all sides. We need immediate air support. Danger close. The request was a formality. The plea was real. The arrogance was gone. Burned away by the sudden, brutal reality of their situation, Eva banked the Warthog so hard the G-force pushed her deep into her seat. She nosed the plane down, the engine screaming as she dove towards the valley of death. The world simplified into a tunnel of instruments, targeting data, and the unfolding nightmare below. Solid copy, Reaper 1, she said, her voice a blade of ice. Valkyrie is inbound. Tell me what you see. We see everything. Another voice, panicked, yelled over the comm. They're everywhere. On the ridges, in the caves. God, Marcus, they've got something new. A new sound ripped through the radio waves, a high-pitched, terrifying shriek that didn't belong in a conventional firefight. It was followed by an explosion that was too clean, too powerful for a standard RPG. What was that? Eva demanded, her fingers flying across her weapons console, selecting the 30mm Gatling gun, the GA-U-8 Avenger, the gun that the Warthog was built around. The sound it made was legendary. The sound of a dragon clearing its throat. The sound of pure, unadulterated death. I don't know, Thorne gasped, the sound of gunfire deafening. In the background, some kind of advanced missile. It's tracking us. It's too fast. Johnson is hit. Johnson is down. Eva's targeting screen locked onto the source of the missile fire. It was a small, mobile unit, almost invisible against the rocks. It wasn't insurgent tech. It was military grade. Advanced. Something she had never seen before. The broker wasn't just selling weapons, he was fielding them. She was diving straight at it, the ground rushing up to meet her. The canyon walls seemed to squeeze in on her, the jagged peaks like teeth waiting to tear her from the sky. Below, the muzzle flashes of the ambush were a swarm of angry fireflies. And somewhere in that inferno were 6 men, the same men who had mocked her an hour ago, now praying for her arrival. She squeezed the trigger. The world outside her cockpit dissolved into a torrent of sound and fury as the GAU-8 roared to life. The BR of the cannon was a physical thing, a shockwave that vibrated through her bones, a sound that promised that whatever was on the receiving end was about to be turned into a fine red mist. A stream of 30mm depleted uranium shells, each the size of a milk bottle, tore into the cliffside, turning rock into dust and ambushes into ghosts. But as the smoke cleared, she saw it. Another one of those missiles, streaking up from the canyon floor, not at the SEALs. This one was for her. It was impossibly fast, its tracking signature unlike anything she'd ever trained for. Her warning system screamed, a digital shriek of impending doom. She had seconds to live. The missile was a silver serpent, closing the distance with terrifying speed. She deployed flares, a shower of incandescent magnesium designed to fool heat seekers. But this missile wasn't chasing heat. It was chasing her. It was locked onto her aircraft's very soul. The missile was 100 yards away. 50. 10. Eva yanked the stick, pulling the Warthog into a gut-wrenching climb, the engine screaming in protest. But it was too late. She braced for the impact, for the flash of light and the sudden, violent end. But what she didn't know was that this was just the beginning. The enemy on the ground was only half the threat. The real danger was far more. Insidious, a ghost in her own machine, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And that moment had just arrived. The explosion was a lie. Eva's mind, conditioned by 1,000 hours of simulation and training, had already processed her own demise. She felt the phantom impact, the imagined shriek of tearing metal, the final, silent fall. But it never came. Instead, a blinding white light flooded her cockpit, and every screen went dead. The roar of her engines cut out, replaced by a terrifying, unnatural silence. For a heart-stopping second, the A-10 was a glider, a 10-ton brick, falling out of the sky. Then, just as suddenly, the power surged back. The engines reignited with a guttural cough, the screens flickered to life, and the calm, synthesized voice of the onboard computer, Betty, announced, all systems nominal. Eva's heart hammered against her ribs. She was alive. The missile hadn't hit her. It had detonated prematurely, a proximity blast designed not to destroy, but to disable. An EMP, a targeted electromagnetic pulse. It was a weapon of surgical precision, something far beyond the capabilities of any insurgent group. The broker wasn't just a dealer, he was a creator. And he had just shown his hand. Valkyrie, what's your status? Did you see that? Thorne's voice, laced with a new, unfamiliar note of awe, crackled through her headset. I'm here, Reaper 1, Eva replied, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. She forced her hands to stop shaking, gripping the flight stick until her knuckles were white. That was an EMP. He's trying to knock me out of the sky. It won't work twice. She lied. She had no idea if it would work twice. The Warthog was old, a flying relic from a different era. It was tough, armored, and built to withstand incredible punishment, but its electronics were its Achilles heel. The EMP blast had been a warning shot. The next one would be a kill. Shot down below, her first strafing run had bought the SEALs a precious few seconds. The hail of 30mm shells had suppressed the ambushes on one side of the canyon, but the fire from the other side was intensifying. And now, they were adapting. They were no longer clustered together, easy targets for the Warthog's cannon. They were spreading out, using the terrain, becoming ghosts in the rocks. Valkyrie, we need you to take out the heavy gunners on the East Ridge, Thorne directed, his voice regaining its command authority. They've got us pinned. We can't move. We can't even get to Johnson. The name hung in the air. Johnson was down. The first casualty. The first price paid for walking into this trap. Eva's resolve hardened into something sharp and dangerous. This was no longer just a mission. It was personal. She had been their joke, their afterthought. Now, she was their only hope. On it, Reaper, she said, her tone clipped. She rolled the A-10, the heavy plane responding with a surprising grace, and lined up another run. This time, she wouldn't use the cannon. The EMP had taught her a lesson. The enemy was smart, and they had technology she didn't understand. A head-on cannon run made her a predictable target. She needed to be something else. She needed to be unpredictable. She descended, not in a straight dive, but in a corkscrewing, erratic pattern, hugging the canyon walls. It was reckless, dangerous flying, the kind of seat-of-your-pants maneuvering that flight instructors washed pilots out for. The canyon was a tight, unforgiving space, and a single miscalculation would send her plowing into a cliff face. The ground proximity warnings blared in her ears, a frantic, repetitive scream. She ignored them. She saw the heavy machine gun nest, tucked into a rocky alcove on the east ridge. They were firing relentlessly, their tracer rounds stitching lines of deadly light across the SEAL's position. She had a clear shot. But she also saw something else. Another one of those missile launchers, being hastily assembled by a team of insurgents just below the gun nest. They were preparing another EMP trap for her. This was the broker's strategy. He was using the SEALs as bait to draw her in, then using his advanced tech to take her out. It was a sophisticated, multi-layered plan. And it was working. Eva had a choice to make, and she had less than a second to make it. Take out the machine gun and save the SEALs from the immediate threat, but leave herself vulnerable to the EMP? Or take out the missile launcher, protecting herself but leaving the SEALs exposed to the heavy gunners for a few more critical seconds? Protocol was clear. The pilot's safety was paramount. The aircraft was a billion-dollar asset. Her life was invaluable. But looking down at the muzzle flashes that represented 6 American lives, Protocol felt like a coward's excuse. She made her choice. Reaper 1. "I'm going for the missile launcher first," she transmitted, her voice tight. "Hold on." She didn't wait for a reply. She armed a Maverick missile, its sophisticated guidance system locking onto the launcher. "Rifle," she whispered, the code word for a missile launch. The Maverick shot off its rail, a streak of white smoke against the darkening sky. The insurgents around the launcher saw it coming. They scattered, diving for cover. The missile struck true, engulfing the launcher in a ball of fire and shrapnel. One threat down. But in the time it had taken her to acquire lock and fire, the machine gun nest had continued its deadly work. "Damn it, Valkyrie, we are getting torn to pieces down here." Decker's voice, raw with pain and fury, screamed over the comm. "Where is that air support?" The mockery was gone, replaced by desperation. The sting of his earlier words was a distant memory. All that mattered now was the sound of his pain. 2 seconds, Reaper, Eva said, her voice a low growl. She had already rolled the Warthog, lining up on the machine gun nest. She was too close for another missile. This had to be the cannon. She was flying low, fast, and straight at them. A perfect target. She was betting everything that she had taken out their only EMP launcher. She squeezed the trigger. The BRD of the cannon echoed through the canyon again, a sound of biblical fury. The machine gun nest vanished in a cloud of pulverized rock. The relentless fire on the SEAL's position ceased. A wave of relief washed over her, so potent it almost made her dizzy. She had done it. She had threaded the needle, but the relief was short-lived. As she pulled up, a new warning tone, one she had never heard before, chirped in her headset. It wasn't a missile lock. It wasn't a system failure. It was something else. Something inside her own systems. A line of code scrolled across a main display screen, a string of characters in a language she didn't recognize. It was elegant, alien, and it was rewriting her own software in real time. "Sky Eye, Valkyrie," she said, her voice trembling for the first time. "I've been hacked. My systems are compromised. Something is in my plane." The broker hadn't just tried to shoot her down with an EMP. That was the crude, physical attack. The real attack, the elegant, invisible one, had been delivered on that pulse of energy. It was a virus, a weaponized piece of code that had ridden the EMP wave and embedded itself deep within the Warthog's electronic brain. The controls suddenly felt sluggish, unresponsive. Her targeting pod began to cycle through targets on its own, locking onto friendly positions, painting Thorne and his men with a targeting laser. "Valkyrie, what are you doing?" Thorne's voice was sharp with alarm. "You're painting us. Cease fire. Cease fire." "I'm not doing it." Eva yelled, fighting the controls. The stick felt like it was set in concrete. The plane was no longer hers. Brunhild, her avenging angel, had been possessed. It was turning on her, turning on the men she was trying to save. The ghost in the machine had taken control. It was forcing her into a steep, Terminal dive. Not into a cliff wall, but directly towards the SEALs' position. The weapon systems armed themselves. The cannon, the bombs, the missiles. Everything was hot. Down below, the SEALs looked up in horror. The plane that was supposed to be their salvation was now their executioner. They saw the Warthog, its ugly, menacing silhouette growing larger and larger, its engine screaming a death song. Eva fought with every ounce of her strength, her muscles straining against the unresponsive controls. She was a prisoner in her own cockpit, a helpless passenger on a 10-ton missile aimed at her own people. Pull up. Valkyrie, pull up. Thorn screamed, his voice a ragged plea. She couldn't. The virus had locked her out. She was trapped, watching through her own eyes as a plane, her partner, was turned into a murder weapon. The ground rushed closer. The faces of the men below, upturned in terror, were the last thing she saw. The virus wasn't just trying to kill her. It was trying to make her a traitor. It was trying to make her murder the men who already thought she was worthless. And as the plane screamed towards the earth, a single, horrifying thought cut through her panic. This was how it ended. Not in a blaze of glory, but in an act of unimaginable betrayal, orchestrated by an enemy she couldn't see and a weapon she couldn't fight. The final insult, delivered by a ghost in her own machine. The ground wasn't just getting closer, it was swallowing the sky. In the terrifying final seconds of the dive, Eva's training, her instincts, and her sheer, stubborn refusal to die converged into a single, desperate idea. The virus was in the machine. It was a ghost living in the wires, a phantom controlling the digital soul of her aircraft. But the Warthog, for all its advanced weaponry, was a product of a bygone era. It was a hybrid, a bridge between the analog past and the digital present. And in that duality lay its salvation. And hers, she stopped fighting the controls. The virus wanted to fly the plane? Fine. Let it. Her hands flew across the console, not to the flight stick or the throttle, but to a series of small, unassuming switches, protected by red plastic guards. The emergency overrides. The manual circuit breakers. They were a relic, a last-ditch feature for a scenario no pilot had faced in decades. Total electronic failure. Or, in this case, total electronic mutiny. With a series of sharp, decisive clicks, she began to sever the connections. She cut the fly-by-wire system, the digital link between her stick and the plane's control surfaces. She cut the auto-targeting, the weapons guidance, the navigation. She was systematically lobotomizing her own aircraft, killing the ghost by destroying its home. The effect was immediate and violent. The A-10, suddenly freed from the virus's precise, digital control, shuddered and bucked like a wild animal. It was no longer a smart weapon. It was a chunk of flying metal, subject only to the laws of physics and the strength of her arms. The stick was no longer locked. It was connected by cables and hydraulics directly to the ailerons and elevators. It was heavy, sluggish, and brutally unforgiving. She pulled back with everything she had, her muscles screaming in protest. The plane responded, its nose slowly, agonizingly, lifting from the dive. The G-forces were immense, threatening to black her out. She grunted, the sound a raw, primal noise in the confines of the cockpit. The canyon floor, which had filled her entire canopy moments before, skimmed past just feet below her wings. She could see individual rocks, the terrified faces of the SEALs as they pressed themselves into the dirt. She was flying. Manually. No computers, no assists, no safety net. It was the purest, most dangerous kind of flying there was. Reaper 1. "This is Valkyrie," she gasped, her voice ragged. "I'm back in control. Sort of. All my electronic systems are down. I'm flying analog." There was a moment of stunned silence on the radio. The concept of flying a modern jet without computers was almost unthinkable. "You're what?" Thorne's voice was incredulous. "I cut the cord," she said, banking the plane manually, the movement clumsy and heavy. "The virus is blind. But so am I. I have no targeting, no navigation, no comms with Sky Eye. All I have is you, my eyes, and a full load of ordnance." This was the midpoint shift. The game had changed. The broker hadn't just revealed a new weapon. He had fundamentally altered the nature of the battle. He had turned her greatest asset, her technologically advanced aircraft, into a liability. Now, she was forced to rely on something more primal, her skill as a pilot, her trust in the men. on the ground, and the raw, dumb power of the warthog itself. The risk had just escalated tenfold. She wasn't just fighting the enemy anymore, she was fighting her own plane. "All right, Valkyrie," Thorne said, his voice now stripped of all its earlier arrogance. In its place was a grim, focused respect. "Welcome to the fight. We'll be your eyes. Let's go to work." The dynamic had been irrevocably altered. She was no longer the distant, unseen support. He was no longer the arrogant, dismissive team leader. They were a team, bound together by desperation and a common enemy. His voice, calm and precise, began to guide her, painting a picture of the battlefield with his words. "Got a concentration. Of enemy fighters in a cave mouth, northeast side of the canyon, about 200 feet up," he directed. "Can you see it?" Eva squinted, her eyes scanning the cliff face. Without her targeting pod, she was relying on the oldest guidance system in the world, her own vision. "I see it," she confirmed. "It's a tight shot." "That's what they're counting on," Thorne said. "They think you can't touch them in there." "They're wrong," Eva growled. She lined up the run, the plane feeling like a stubborn mule under her control. She couldn't use the smart bombs or the guided missiles. Their electronic brains were fried. But she still had the cannon. And she still had the dumb bombs, the unguided, 500-pound Mk-82s. They didn't need a computer to work. They just needed gravity and a pilot with a good eye. She dove, the wind screaming past her canopy. Thorne's voice was a steady presence in her ear, calling out corrections. "Little to the left. Valkyrie. Hold that line. You're looking good." It was like learning to fly all over again. Every adjustment was a physical effort, every gust of wind a potential disaster. She pickled the bomb, releasing it with a satisfying thud. She didn't wait to see it hit. She pulled up sharply, the canyon walls a blur on either side. The explosion behind her was a deep, concussive boom that echoed through the canyon. "Direct hit." Decker's voice shouted over the radio, filled with a savage glee. "You buried them. You glorious, beautiful pilot." A small, grim smile touched Eva's lips. It was a small victory, but it was a start. They spent the next 20 minutes in a deadly dance. Thorne would call out targets, and Eva, with a combination of instinct and raw skill, would deliver the payload. She was a surgeon with a sledgehammer, her movements clumsy but devastatingly effective. She took out sniper nests with bursts from her cannon, collapsed ambush points with perfectly placed bombs. The SEALs, emboldened by her presence, began to move, pushing forward, taking the fight to the enemy. But the broker was not a man to be underestimated. He had lost his technological advantage over her plane, but he still had tricks up his sleeve. "Valkyrie, be advised." Thorne's voice crackled, a new urgency in his tone. "We are seeing something new. The enemy is deploying some kind of drone. Small, fast. Looks like they're coming from a cave system higher up the main cliff face." Eva scanned the sky. She saw them. A swarm of them. They weren't the large, slow-moving predator drones she was used to. These were small, agile, like a swarm of angry hornets. They moved with an unnatural, synchronized grace, their flight paths too complex to be human-piloted. They were autonomous, AI-controlled, and they were coming for her. The drones weren't. Armed with missiles. They were armed with something far more insidious. As they closed in, they began to emit a high-frequency pulse, a wave of energy that made the metal of her aircraft vibrate. It was a resonance weapon. They weren't trying to shoot her down. They were trying to shake her plane apart. Her teeth chattered, and the instrument panel blurred. The entire airframe was groaning under the strain, the metal screaming in protest. It was like flying through a continuous explosion. "I can't." "Hold it steady," she grunted into the radio, fighting to keep the warthog level. The drones were a swarm, a cloud of deadly, intelligent machines. She couldn't outrun them. Her dumb bombs were useless against such small, fast-moving targets. Her cannon was her only hope, but trying to hit them while her plane was being vibrated to pieces was like trying to thread a needle in an earthquake. She fired a burst, the 30mm shells tearing through the air. She managed to hit 1, 2, 3 of the drones, which exploded in small puffs of smoke and metal. But there were dozens more. For every one she destroyed, 2 more took its place, their high-frequency hum a rising chorus of doom. One of the drones, faster and more agile than the rest, broke from the swarm. It dove straight at her, not at the fuselage or the wings, but at her cockpit. It wasn't trying to destroy the plane. It was trying to kill the pilot. Eva saw it coming, a black, insect-like shape growing in her canopy. She had no time to react, no way to dodge. This was it. The ghost in the machine had failed, so the master of the machine was sending his minions to finish the job himself. The drone was feet from her canopy, its single, red optical sensor glowing with malevolent intelligence. She could see the intricate machinery, the cold, unfeeling purpose in its design. It was a perfect killing machine, and it was about to punch through her cockpit and end her life. But as the drone prepared to strike, a new voice, calm and chillingly familiar, came over her radio. It wasn't Thorne. It wasn't Decker. It was a voice that shouldn't have been there, a voice that bypassed the radio and spoke directly inside her helmet, as if it was standing right behind her. "Impressive, Captain Rostova," the voice said, smooth and cultured, with an accent she couldn't place. "You are more resourceful than I anticipated. But this is where your luck runs out." It was the broker. He had hacked her comms. He was watching her, talking to her, as his machine prepared to kill her. The drone struck the canopy, not with an explosion, but with the sharp, sickening crack of reinforced plexiglass giving way. A spiderweb of fractures spread across her view, and the cold, thin air of high altitude began to scream into the cockpit. The ghost was no longer in the machine. He was in her head. And his killer drone was breaking down her door. The sound of fracturing plexiglass was the sound of her world ending. The cold was a physical shock, a needle of ice that pierced her flight suit and stabbed at her lungs. The air in the cockpit thinned instantly, the pressure dropping. Her oxygen mask was her only lifeline, feeding her precious air as the drone outside hammered at the canopy again, relentless, methodical. The spiderweb of cracks deepened, spreading like a frozen virus across her window to the world. "You see, Captain," the broker's voice whispered in her ear, a calm, conversational poison. "True power isn't in the weapon, but in the control of the weapon. You fly a relic, a dumb, brute instrument. I command a symphony, and you are merely a discordant note about to be silenced." His symphony was the swarm of drones, their high-frequency resonance attack continuing to shake her warthog to its core. Her plane was a bell being rung by a devil, and she was trapped inside. The physical vibration was nauseating, but the psychological assault was worse. The broker's voice, a calm monologue of doom delivered directly into her helmet, was an invasion of her last sanctuary. He wasn't just trying to kill her, he was trying to unmake her, to dismantle her resolve piece by piece before the final blow. "Reaper 1, I've got a breach," she managed to yell into the comms, her words strained through clenched teeth. "Canopy is failing. And the broker, he's on this channel." The response from the ground was a mixture of confusion and alarm. "What do you mean he's on the channel? Valkyrie, get out of there. Disengage." Thorne ordered, but there was no escape. The swarm was all around her, a synchronized cage of metal and sonic fury. To disengage would be to turn her back on them, a fatal mistake. And below, the SEALs were still in the fight of their lives. Leaving was not an option. It had never been an option. The drone struck the canopy a third time. A chunk of plexiglass, the size of a fist, broke away, sucked out into the slipstream. The wind howled into the cockpit, a physical assault that tore at her, trying to rip her from her seat. The noise was deafening, a constant, shrieking vortex. She had to do something. She was a cornered animal, and cornered animals are the most dangerous. She couldn't fight the swarm, and she couldn't fight the drone on her canopy. So she changed the equation. She did the one thing the broker's perfect, AI-controlled symphony would never anticipate. She stopped flying, she chopped the throttles and deployed her air brakes. The massive, 10-ton warthog, which had been plowing through the air at over 300 miles per hour, suddenly and violently decelerated. It was like hitting a wall in mid-air. The drones, programmed for a high-speed chase, shot past her, their perfect formation momentarily thrown into chaos. The drone on her canopy, however, was not so easily dispatched. It had latched on, its metallic claws dug into the frame. But the sudden deceleration had an unintended consequence. The drone, its own forward momentum unchecked, was slammed against the canopy with the force of a car crash. The already fractured plexiglass shattered. The world became a maelstrom of wind, noise, and flying debris. The drone was inside. It was in her cockpit, a thrashing, metallic horror just inches from her face. its single red eye fixed on her. A small, articulated arm, tipped with a wicked-looking spike, extended from its chassis. It was a close-quarters weapon, designed for a single, precise, lethal strike. Eva reacted on pure instinct. She unstrapped her harness with one hand, the negative GS of a sudden stall trying to pull her from her seat. With the other, she grabbed the heaviest thing she could reach, the fire extinguisher mounted next to her chair. The drone lunged, the spike aiming for her throat. She swung the extinguisher, a desperate, wild arc of red metal. The impact was jarring, a solid, satisfying crunch of metal on metal. The drone was knocked sideways, its spike embedding itself in the instrument panel, which sparked and died. She swung again, and again, bringing the heavy canister down on the drone chassis. It was brutal, ugly, and utterly analog. She was beating the high-tech killing machine to death with a fire extinguisher at 20,000 feet. The drone's red eye flickered and went dark. It lay mangled and sparking on her dashboard, a trophy of her desperate, primal victory. "Your symphony just lost its conductor," she snarled, though she knew the broker couldn't hear her. She had bigger problems. Her cockpit was open to the elements, her plane was in a stall, and the rest of the drone swarm was recovering, their formation tightening as they prepared for another attack. She kicked the rudder, forcing the nose of the Warthog down, trading altitude for airspeed. The plane responded, the stall turning into a dive. She was back in control, but she was exposed, vulnerable. "Valkyrie, what is your status?" Thorne's voice was a lifeline in the chaos. "Cockpit's a little drafty, but I'm still in the game," she replied, her own voice surprising her with its steadiness. "The swarm is regrouping. I can't dodge them forever." "You don't have to," Thorne said. "Just get them to follow you. Lead them down the North Canyon." "What's in the North Canyon?" she asked, banking the plane towards the designated route. The drones followed, a persistent, deadly shadow. "Us," Decker's voice cut in. "We are setting up our own welcoming party. Just bring our guests to the door." It was a risky, desperate plan. The SEALs were going to try and shoot down the drones themselves, but their small arms fire would be like throwing pebbles at a hornet's nest. Unless they had something more. Eva put her faith in the men on the ground. She flew the Warthog low and fast into the narrow confines of the North Canyon, the swarm hot on her tail. The rock walls were a blur, so close she felt she could reach out and touch them. This was where her manual flying skills were tested to their absolute limit. One wrong move and she would be a smear on the canyon wall. The drones, slaves to their programming, followed her in, their perfect formation forced to compress in the tight space. They were like fish in a barrel now. Thorne's voice commanded. From hidden positions on both sides of the canyon, the SEALs opened up. But it wasn't just rifle fire. A new sound joined the symphony of battle, the low, guttural thump-thump-thump of automatic grenade launchers. And the grenades they were firing were not standard explosives. They exploded in mid-air, releasing a cloud of metallic chaff and a burst of electromagnetic energy. They were miniature, localized EMP grenades, the SEAL's own answer to the broker's technology. The effect on the drone swarm was catastrophic. Their delicate electronic systems were fried. They fell from the sky like stones. Their synchronized dance turned into a chaotic, silent rain of death. They crashed into the canyon walls, into the ground, their malevolent red eyes extinguished. Forever.in seconds, the sky was clear. The swarm was gone. A cheer erupted over the radio, a raw, triumphant sound from the men on the ground. Eva felt a surge of victory so powerful it left her breathless. They had done it. They had faced a technologically superior foe, and they had won, using a combination of old-school grit and clever, improvised tactics. "Valkyrie, you did it." Thorne's voice was filled with an emotion she had never heard from him before, genuine, unadulterated respect. "The area is clear. We've got the broker's men on the run. We're moving to secure Johnson and prep for exfil." "Solid. Copy, Reaper," Eva said, a real smile finally reaching her lips. She began to climb, nursing her battered, broken plane back towards the safety of altitude. The wind still howled through her shattered canopy, but it no longer felt like a threat. It felt like the song of victory, but the feeling was a dangerous illusion. As she climbed, a new warning light, one that had survived her manual override, and the drone's assault, began to blink on a small, auxiliary panel. It was a light she had prayed she would never see. It indicated that one of her paveway bombs, the most powerful weapon she carried, had just been armed. She hadn't armed it. The virus was dead. The drones were gone. Then, the broker's voice returned, no longer in her helmet, but broadcast over the open channel, for the SEALs to hear as well. And this time, it wasn't calm or conversational. It was triumphant. "Did you really think it was that simple, Captain?" he mocked. "The drones, the virus, that was all just a distraction. A show to keep you busy. The real weapon was delivered the moment my first missile detonated." A cold dread, far worse than anything she had felt before, washed over Eva. "It's not a virus, Captain. It's a parasite. A piece of hardware. A receiver, no bigger than a grain of rice, that was attached to your fuselage by the magnetic charge of the EMP. And I have the detonator right here. You see, you haven't been my target all along. You've been my delivery system." On her weapons display, a timer appeared. A 5-minute countdown. The bomb under her wing was no longer her weapon. It was his. And she was flying a 500-pound smart bomb directly over the heads of the men she had just saved. She couldn't jettison it. The parasite had given him control of that system too. She was a Trojan horse, a flying time bomb, and the clock was ticking 0.5 minutes. The two words echoed in the sudden, dead silence of the radio. 5 minutes until her warthog, her avenging angel, became a flying coffin and a weapon of mass destruction aimed squarely at the men who were now her brothers in arms. The victory of moments before curdled into a cold, sickening dread. The broker had outplayed them all. The virus, the drones, it was all an elaborate piece of theater designed to mask his true endgame. He hadn't been trying to shoot her down. He'd been tagging her, turning her into his own personal guided missile. "Valkyrie, get out of there." Thorne's voice was a raw command, laced with a desperation that mirrored her own. "Eject. That's an order. Eject." The rational, logical choice. Her life for theirs. But as she looked down at the canyon, at the tiny, scattered heat signatures of the SEALs moving to consolidate their position, she knew she couldn't. If she ejected, the plane, uncontrolled, would fall. Where it would land was anyone's guess. It could hit the SEALs. It could miss. But the bomb, now under the broker's control, would detonate regardless. He could likely trigger it remotely the second he lost her signal. Ejecting didn't solve the problem. It just guaranteed her survival while leaving her friends to chance, and there was another, colder calculation in her mind. The broker's parasite. It was a piece of hardware, a technological marvel of miniaturization and remote access. It was a weapon that could change the face of warfare. If she went down in that canyon, he would recover it. He would perfect it. He would sell it to the highest bidder. Millions would die.no. She couldn't eject. She couldn't let him win. "Not like this, negative, Reaper 1, she said, her voice eerily calm. The panic had subsided, replaced by a crystalline, razor-sharp focus. The kind of focus that comes when you have nothing left to lose. "I'm not leaving my plane. And I'm not letting this bastard get his toy back." "For minutes, what are you talking about?" Decker's voice demanded. "There's no time." "There's enough time," she replied. Her eyes scanned the horizon, the jagged peaks of the Hindu Kush Mountains. An idea, wild and suicidal, began to form in her mind. It was a pilot's nightmare, a maneuver that existed only in textbooks as a cautionary tale. But it was all she had left. "Thorne," she said, her voice now a commander's, not a subordinate's. "I need you to do something for me. I need you to find the broker. He's got to be close to transmit the signal. He'll be on high ground. Direct line of sight to this canyon. Find him." "We are already looking," Thorne replied, his voice grim. "But Eva, just find him, Marcus," she said, using his first name for the first time. It was a strangely intimate gesture. In the face of death. "I'm going to handle the bomb." 3 minutes. She pushed the throttles to the firewall. The battered Warthog, with its shattered canopy and howling cockpit, surged forward, climbing steeply. The wind was a physical beast, trying to tear her apart, but she held on, her eyes fixed on a single, massive peak that dominated the skyline. It was Koskar, the highest mountain in the region, a monster of rock and ice, his symphony, she whispered to herself, the wind snatching the words away. The broker's taunt had given her the key. He controlled her bomb. But that control required a signal. A signal, like any radio wave, could be broken. It could be interrupted. All she needed was to put something very big, very solid, between her plane and his transmitter. A mountain, for instance, 0.2 minutes, we've got him. A new voice. One of the other SEALs shouted over the comm, he's on a ridge, 2 clicks south of your position. He's packing up. He's getting ready to run. Of course he was. He had fired his shot. He assumed he had one. Now he was leaving the theater before the final, bloody act. Don't let him leave, Eva ordered, her voice an iron command. But do not, I repeat, do not engage until I give the word. She was closing on the mountain, the sheer rock face filling her vision. Her plan was simple in its insanity. She was going to fly so close to the mountain that its mass would sever the broker's connection to the bomb. For that to work, she needed to be on the other side of it, breaking the line of sight. But if she did that, she would lose radio contact. With the SEALs. She would be alone, blind, and deaf, with a live bomb strapped to her wing. 1 minute. Marcus, she said, her voice softening for a fraction of a second. It's been an honor. Godspeed, Valkyrie, he replied, his voice thick with emotion. She banked the plane, her wingtips so close to the rock she could see the texture of the granite. The world became a blur of grey stone. Her radio crackled with static, the SEALs' voices dissolving into a hiss. She was on the dark side of the mountain. She was alone, the timer on her screen was still there, a mocking, digital ghost. But was it still connected? Was it just a dead man's switch, counting down on its own internal clock? Or had she successfully cut the cord? 30 seconds, she held her breath, her eyes glued to the blinking red numbers. This was it. The ultimate gamble. 20 seconds. Her hand hovered over the manual jettison switch for the bomb. If she had broken the signal, maybe, just maybe, her own manual controls would work again. 10 seconds. 9. 8. 7. She flicked the switch. Nothing happened. The bomb remained stubbornly attached to her wing. The broker's parasite was still in control. Her gambit had failed. 5. 4. 3. She closed her eyes, a strange sense of peace settling over her. She thought of her father, of the endless Texas sky, of the first time she had ever taken flight. She had lived her dream. 2. 1.0. Silence, a profound, echoing silence. She opened her eyes. She was still alive. The timer on her screen was gone, replaced by a single, blinking word. Disconnected. IT had worked. The mountain had shielded her. The broker had lost his connection at the last possible second. The bomb was still armed, but the triggerman was gone, but the danger wasn't over. This was the false ending, the moment the audience thinks they can breathe, right before the real monster appears. The bomb was still live. A sophisticated piece of ordnance, it would have its own internal failsafe. If it lost its command signal for too long, it might detonate on its own. She had to get rid of it. She flew out from behind the mountain, the radio crackling back to life. Kyrie, do you read? Eva, are you there? I'm here, she said, her voice hoarse. The bomb is disarmed. But I need to lose it. Now. She had an idea. It was poetic. It was just Marcus, she said, her voice now cold and deadly. Where is he? He's making a run for a vehicle on the ridge, Thorne reported. He knows he's lost. Paint him, Eva said. What? Use your laser designator, she commanded. Put it right on his chest. Now. A moment of hesitation, then, okay. Target is painted. Eva smiled. The bomb was a paveway. A smart bomb. It was designed to follow a laser. The broker had given her the weapon. The SEALs would provide the guidance. And she would be the delivery system, just as he'd intended. Only the address had changed. She rolled the warthog, diving back towards the ridge. She couldn't see the broker, but she didn't need to. She just needed to get the bomb sensor to see the laser. She flew low, the bomb seeker head scanning the terrain. Then, it locked on. A loud, steady tone filled her cockpit. The bomb had found its target. Bombs away, she whispered, and this time, when she hit the jettison switch, it worked. The 500-pound bomb dropped from her wing, its fins deploying, its guidance system steering it unerringly towards the tiny, invisible speck of laser light on the ridge below. She pulled up, banking hard to watch her handiwork. She saw a figure on the ridge, turning to look up, his face a mask of disbelief as he saw her plane, alive, and realized the nature of the screaming object falling from the sky. He saw his own weapon, his own perfect creation, coming to deliver. His own perfect death. The explosion was immense, a cleansing fire that lit up the entire ridge. The broker, his vehicle, his technology, his symphony, all of it was erased from the world in a flash of light and a clap of thunder. Poetic justice, delivered at 300 miles an hour, she circled the smoking crater once, a silent, final salute. Then she turned her battered, broken, beautiful plane for home. The flight back was long and cold, the wind a constant roar in her shattered cockpit. But she didn't feel it. She felt a warmth spreading through her chest, a feeling she hadn't realized she'd been chasing her whole life: respect. When she landed, the entire base was there. Not just the ground crew, but pilots, mechanics, even the cooks. And standing at the front, waiting for her as she climbed down, weary and bruised, from her cockpit, was Reaper Team. Thorne stepped forward. He didn't say anything. He simply raised his hand in a slow, deliberate salute. One by one, the other SEALs, Decker, the man who had mocked her, and the others, did the same. It wasn't a salute to a captain. It was a salute to a warrior. To a sister, Eva Rostova, the girl they called Valkyrie, the pilot they had dismissed. The ghost they thought was a liability, returned the salute. The dust of the Kandahar airfield still hung in the air. But for the first time, it didn't taste like contempt. It tasted like victory.